The smell of disinfectant and an ancient sadness permeates every corner of this room. It's an anonymous smell that clings to the thin sheets and the lifeless beige walls, the color of resignation. I look out the window, but the view is just a patch of gray Madrid sky, framed by discreet bars that try to pass as decoration. There is nothing here that speaks of me. The silence is what weighs the most, a dense absence that brutally contrasts with the symphony of life in my apartment in Chambéry, where every book on the shelf, every note I played on the grand piano, told a chapter of my story. There, the air smelled of olive oil, rosemary, and the dust from my late husband's history books. Here, it smells of the end. I huddle in the wool shawl that seems too large for my now stooped shoulders. The woman I see reflected in the window pane is not the Pilar who passionately curated art exhibitions, who walked direct through the streets of Madrid, observing the architecture and life. This is a faded version, a fragile caricature of myself. My eyes, once trained to find the beauty and hidden meaning in a painting, now seem lost, clouded by a disappointment I still can't fully name. My hands, their skin as thin as paper and stained by time, rest inert on my lap, useless, as if they have forgotten how to hold a brush, a book, my son's hand. The sound of expensive shoes echoing in the sterile hallway announces his arrival. It is a precise, confident sound, the sound of Hugo. He has always walked as if the world should step aside to let him pass. The door opens without a prior knock, and he enters, bringing with him the scent of an expensive cologne that seems to fight against the room's antiseptic aroma. His suit is perfectly tailored, his hair impeccable, the watch on his wrist gleaming under the cold fluorescent light. He carries a black leather briefcase in one hand, and his smile is as well constructed as his appearance, a facade of filial concern that doesn't reach his eyes. "Mama, how are you?" His voice is smooth, controlled, the tone he uses to calm nervous investors. He leans in and kisses my forehead, a cold, quick touch that conveys no warmth. I don't answer. I just watch him. The words seem stuck in my throat, a knot of hurt and confusion. A week ago, he brought me here with the promise that it would only be for a few days, for observation and rest after a silly, dizzy spell. I believed him, because a mother always wants to believe in her son's goodness. Now, the leather briefcase in his hand tells me the lie is over, and the truth will be far more painful than any fall. He pulls the uncomfortable chair close to my bed, and the scraping sound of its legs on the linoleum sends a shiver down my spine. He places the briefcase on the bedside table with a dull thud, a final sound, like a judge's gavel. The sleek black leather seems like an alien object in this environment of false simplicity, a symbol of a world I no longer belong to, a world of business, of contracts, of values not measured in love or memory. I feel my heart quicken, a weak, irregular beat against my ribs as my eyes fix on that object, anticipating the wound he is about to open with the tools he keeps inside. He begins with a sigh, the sigh of a man burdened by responsibilities of his own making. "Mama, we've spoken with the doctors. They believe your condition requires constant care, supervision." His speech is a rehearsed monologue, full of euphemisms and a false concern that insults me. He talks about my safety, my well-being, words that in his mouth lose all meaning and become mere pieces in his financial chess game. He doesn't look me in the eye as he speaks, his gaze shifting to the window, to the hallway, anywhere but the face of the woman who gave him life and is now about to have hers stolen by him. With a deliberate gesture, he opens the briefcase. My eyes fall on the papers he pulls out, a stack of white sheets covered in legal language I don't understand, but whose purpose I feel in my bones. He explains to me, with the condescending patience of someone speaking to a child, that they are documents to give him power of attorney, a power to manage my assets, he says, to make things easier. The word apartment finally emerges, spoken casually, as if it were just another item on a to-do list. He needs to sell the apartment to cover my long-term care here, in this institution he has chosen for me. A coldness spreads through my chest. "No." The word comes out as a whisper, weak, almost inaudible. Hugo, that house. I try to speak about his father, about the walls that watched us grow, about the library he built with his own hands, about the afternoon sun that streams through the balcony and illuminates the marks on the floor where he learned to walk. I try to evoke the sentimental value, the only value that matters to me, but my voice fails. The image of my home, my refuge, my personal museum, being invaded, appraised and sold by strangers, is a profanity that leaves me breathless. It's as if he's selling my very soul. Hugo's mask of concern finally falls, replaced by an irritated impatience. His jaw clenches. He leans forward, his voice now a low, sharp whisper, devoid of any affection. He is no longer trying to convince me. He is informing me of a decision already made, a sentence he himself has passed. Mama, don't be childish. We need to be practical. The apartment is an asset and we need liquidity. Beatrice and I have plans. We have debts. Your upkeep here is expensive. The coldness with which he speaks of money, of his problems, as if they were more important than my life, is the first stab. Then, he delivers the final blow, the words that will become the soundtrack to my nightmare. Mama, you can't live alone anymore. It's a burden for us to ensure your safety. This is your place now. The word burden explodes in the silence of the room. Burden, an obstacle, a weight, an unwanted object. In my entire life, I have been so many things: wife, curator, friend, mother, but never, not in my worst fear, did I imagine I would become a burden to my only son. The word echoes, ricocheting off the beige walls and settling in my heart, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. The silence that follows is heavier than any scream. I stare at him, seeing for the first time not the boy I raised, but a stranger with his face, a man consumed by greed, a man for whom love and loyalty are just abstract concepts, easily discarded when they become inconvenient. He shows no remorse, only the frustration of someone encountering an unexpected obstacle in his path. The image I had of my son, built over 43 years with love and sacrifice, crumbles in an instant, reduced to ashes by a single, cruel word. He places the papers and a pen on my lap, on top of my trembling hands. Think about it, Mama. It's for the best for everyone. His voice tries to sound reasonable, but the threat is implicit. He stands up, adjusts his jacket, and walks towards the door without looking back. He offers no word of comfort, no final gesture of affection, just the sound of his footsteps fading away, leaving behind the devastation he has caused. The door closes with a soft click, sealing my fate, locking me in my new reality of being a discarded burden. I remain motionless. The weight of the papers on my lap is unbearable. My eyes burn, but only a single tear manages to escape, tracing a slow, warm path down my wrinkled cheek. It falls onto the document, blurring the ink right over the word sale. In that moment, humiliation consumes me, a wave of shame and helplessness. I am Pilar, 79 years old, a burden. Yet, beneath the overwhelming pain, something else begins to stir. A tiny, almost extinguished ember of anger and defiance. The woman who analyzed art, who found strength in beauty, is still here, and she refuses to be erased. In the forced stillness of that room, the nights were the longest. The echo of the word burden haunted me, trying to convince me of its truth. But then, in the midst of the darkness, my husband Javier's voice would emerge in my memory, as clear as if he were beside me. I remembered an afternoon, years ago, while we were cleaning his history books. Our home is like a museum of our lives, Pilar, he said, with that gentle smile of his. Every object tells our story. Never let anyone erase it. His words became my lighthouse in the Tao. Darkness, the anchor that kept me from sinking in the tide of despair. I was not a burden. I was a living museum, and I would not allow my collection to be liquidated. This memory ignited the ember of my dignity. The humiliation Hugo had imposed on me transformed into fuel. Sadness gave way to a cold, sharp resolution. I was not a fragile, senile old woman waiting for the end. I was Pilar, the woman who had dedicated her life to preserving beauty and history, and my own history would be no exception. I looked at my hands, which I had previously seen as useless, and saw them differently. They were the hands that had rocked my son, that had leafed through countless art books, that had loved a good man. They were strong hands, and they were going to fight to reclaim what was mine by right, not for its material value, but for its life value. It was then that I remembered a small treasure hidden at the bottom of my handbag, an object the residence staff had deemed insignificant. An old, simple cell phone with large buttons, which I had kept for emergencies. In the dead of night, when the only sound was the rhythmic breathing of other residents in the hallways, I took it out. The small screen lit up, a glimmer of hope in my trembling hands. I dialed the number I hadn't used in years, the number of my best friend's niece, Sophia, a young lawyer whose ambition and intelligence my friend had always praised. With each ring of the call, my heart beat with a mixture of fear and determination. I was about to declare war on my own son. "Hello?" Sophia's voice on the other end of the line was sleepy but alert. I tried to explain my situation, my words stumbling over each other, shame and urgency fighting for primacy. "I'm Pilar, a friend of your aunt's. I need help." I could feel her hesitation, the natural suspicion of someone receiving a strange call from an elderly woman in a nursing home in the middle of the night. But I persisted, my voice gaining firmness as I told her about the apartment, the documents, the cruel word that had defined me. I did not plead. I reported the facts with the precision of a curator describing a work of art, and it was that dignity, in the midst of desperation, that made her stop and truly listen. Hugo and Beatrice returned a few days later, this time with a different tactic. They brought my favorite pastries and a bouquet of flowers that looked like an apology. The concern on their faces was a performance worthy of a grand theater. "Mama, we were so worried," Beatrice said, her syrupy voice making me nauseous. "We only want what's best for you. Sign the papers and all of this will be over." They painted a picture of a peaceful future for me, financed by the sale of our house. It was psychological torture, an attempt to make me feel guilty and selfish for clinging to the past, for clinging to my own life. For a fleeting moment, as I looked at Hugo's face, the face of the boy I had taught to read, the pain of betrayal was replaced by a pang of maternal guilt. Where did I go wrong? Was the love I gave him insufficient to teach him what truly matters? Doubt gnawed at me, an insidious voice whispering that perhaps fighting him would turn me into a bitter and vengeful woman. Exactly the image he wanted to paint of me. The internal conflict was a storm, the instinct to forgive my son at war with the survival instinct of the woman he was trying to erase. But then I would look into his eyes, and I saw not my boy, only the cold ambition of a stranger. The battle was not just internal. The administration of Residencia El Buen Descanso was a bureaucratic monster. To them, I was room 2B, a number on a cost sheet. My attempts to explain the situation, to ask to use a telephone with more privacy, were met with condescending smiles and empty promises. "We'll check, Mrs. Pilar. Calm down. Everything will be resolved." I was invisible, my voice muffled by the impersonal routine of the place. This institutional indifference was almost as painful as Hugo's betrayal, as it confirmed his narrative. I was just an old woman, a piece to be moved and managed, without a will of my own. Sophia's first visit was like a breath of fresh air in that stagnant environment. She was young, with intelligent eyes, and an energy that contrasted with the lethargy of the place. She didn't treat me like a confused, elderly woman. She listened to me, asked sharp questions, and analyzed the copy of the documents I had managed to keep. As I spoke, I touched the small silver brooch I always wear, a gift from Javier. I told her the story behind it, and I saw a flash of understanding in her eyes. She didn't just see a legal case, she saw a story that deserved to be defended. In that moment, I ceased to be a client and became a cause for her. "It will be a fight, Pilar," Sophia said, her voice serious but encouraging. "Hugo will claim that you don't have the capacity to make your own decisions. We need to prove him wrong. For the first time in a long time, my mind, previously clouded by sadness, became incredibly clear. We discussed strategies, names of friends who could testify on my behalf, financial details that could expose Hugo's debts. The art curator in me awakened. I began to organize the facts of my life as if I were putting together an exhibition, each memory a piece of evidence, each pain a piece of the puzzle that would prove my sanity and his greed. A few days later, Sophia called me with the first piece of good news. She had obtained an injunction, a temporary court order that prohibited any transaction involving my apartment until a competency hearing could be held. It was a small victory, a temporary shield, but to me, it felt monumental. I felt a wave of strength course through my body, a feeling I hadn't experienced since Javier's death. Hope, which seemed to have abandoned me forever, once again took up residence in my chest. I was no longer alone in this fight. The gears of justice, though slow, had begun to turn in my favor. The court notice hit Hugo like a bomb. His next visit came with no flowers or pastries. His face was a mask of restrained fury. "What do you think you're doing?" he hissed, his voice low so the nurses wouldn't hear. "Hiring a lawyer? Are you trying to ruin me, after everything I've done for you?" The irony of his words was so absurd I almost laughed. He didn't see the betrayal, only the obstacle I had placed in his path. The threat was no longer veiled. He made it clear that he would use every weapon to have me declared incompetent, to strip me of everything. War was officially declared. Pilar's journey to reclaim her dignity is just beginning, and the battle against her own son will take her to a limit she never imagined. Every step will be a test of her strength and courage. If you are rooting for her, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications, because what happens next is an act of overcoming so unexpected it will change everything you think about justice and family. Believe me, you won't want to miss the surprising end to this story. The months that followed were a slow, grueling chess match. Hugo, certain that the justice system would only see a confused old woman manipulated by an opportunistic lawyer, underestimated me. He believed that time and isolation in the residence would make me give in. Little did he know that every day in that beige place, every tasteless meal, every condescending smile from the nurses only strengthened my resolve. Advised by his own lawyers to keep up appearances, he stopped the direct threats. But his impatience was palpable. He needed the money, and my refusal to disappear quietly was ruining his perfectly calculated plans. His arrogance was his biggest mistake. He never believed that the mother he considered a burden could actually fight back. Convinced that the injunction was just a bureaucratic setback, he decided to force the issue. He arrived at my building, in Chambéry on a sunny morning, accompanied by a slick-looking real estate agent. He walked with the air of an owner, pointing to the classic facade, talking about market potential and valuable square meters. The agent, impressed, took notes, envisioning a generous commission. Hugo saw bricks and mortar, an asset to be liquidated. He was incapable of seeing the windows through which I had watched life go by, the balcony where my husband read the newspaper every Sunday, the door that had opened to welcome friends, family, and decades of memories. With an air of superiority, he took out his set of keys and inserted the one that had always been the key to his childhood home into the lock. It didn't turn. He tried again, with more force, frustration beginning to crease his brow. He jiggled the handle, but the door remained solidly shut. Confused, he examined the lock and realized it was new, shiny, different. The lock had been changed. His confusion quickly turned to cold anger. How was this possible? Who would dare bar him from entering what he already considered his property? That small piece of metal was an act of defiance he couldn't comprehend. At that exact moment, a black taxi pulled up to the curb. The back door opened and I stepped out, assisted by the driver. I was not the woman huddled in a wool shawl he had left at the nursing home. I had asked Sophia to bring me some of my best clothes. I wore a colorful silk scarf around my neck, a silver brooch gleaming on the lapel of my coat, and my hair, once disheveled by apathy, was styled. I leaned on an elegant cane, more for balance than for need, and my shoulders were straight. But the biggest change was in my eyes. They were direct, firm, and completely devoid of the fear he expected to see. Hugo was paralyzed, shock written all over his face. The real estate agent looked from me to him, his discomfort evident. "Mama? What is the meaning of this?" Hugo stammered, his voice losing all composure. He took a step towards me, fury replacing surprise. He wasn't seeing his mother. He was seeing his plan unraveling, his financial house of cards being blown away by a breeze of dignity he had not anticipated. To him, my presence there, standing strong, was a betrayal, a breaking of the helpless victim role he had written for me in his selfish script. His anger exploded, raw and unfiltered, revealing the truth behind all his false concern. "You're ruining my future! My future!" he shouted, his voice echoing on the quiet street. "This house is my inheritance. It's what you owe me by right." The word inheritance was spoken as if I were already dead, as if my only remaining purpose was to facilitate his life after my departure. He didn't speak of love, of care, of family. He spoke of money, of rights, of a future he felt I was stealing from him by simply continuing to exist and fight for my own life. I faced him, letting his anger break against my calm, like waves against a rock. I did not scream. I did not cry. The woman he had humiliated in the nursing home had found a strength she didn't even know she possessed. My voice, when I spoke, was steady, clear, and without a hint of hatred. Hatred would place him at the center of my story, and I would no longer give him that power. "No, Hugo," I said, and the sound of my own name in my voice sounded powerful. "This house is not your inheritance. This house is my life." And then, I used the weapon he himself had given me, the word he had used to discard me, turning it into my shield and my sword. "And you taught me something very important, my son. You taught me that when something in our life becomes a burden, a weight that prevents us from moving forward, we must free ourselves from it." I looked directly into his eyes, seeing comprehension begin to dawn through his fury, the horror of having his own words used against him. He was beginning to understand that the woman he tried to break had rebuilt herself with the very pieces he had left behind. The final blow was silent, but devastating. "I have freed myself from the responsibility of erasing my history to finance your mistakes." Each word was spoken with absolute clarity. The real estate agent, sensing the immense tension and realizing there would be no deal, discreetly backed away, murmuring an excuse and disappearing down the street. Hugo stood alone on the sidewalk, looking at me, completely disarmed. He had expected tears, pleas, weakness. He was not prepared for dignity. He was not prepared for the strength of a woman who had decided that her self-worth was the one property he could never take from her. He stood there, speechless, as I turned, took my new key from my purse, and opened the door to my home. The click of the lock opening was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of my freedom, of my victory. As I stepped inside and closed the door, I left behind not only a son who had betrayed me, but also the fragile, frightened woman I had become. In that moment, in the entrance of my home, under the Madrid sun, I was no longer a burden. I was the owner of my life. I was Pilar, and I was back. The victory at my front door was the end of the battle, but not the end of my journey. Living in that apartment, as much as I loved it, now carried the shadow of what had happened. Every corner held not only the happy memories with Javier, but also the bitter echo of Hugo's greed. So, I made a decision that shocked Sophia, but for me was the final step of my liberation. I decided to sell the apartment, but on my own terms. It wasn't an escape, it was a choice. I was pruning the dead branches so that the tree of my life could bloom again somewhere else, under a new sun. I no longer needed those walls to protect my story. Now, I carried it inside me. With the considerable proceeds from the sale, which exceeded 1.2 million euros, I could have lived anywhere, in any luxury. But I wasn't seeking opulence. I was seeking life. I moved to Seville, to a high-end assisted living community, close to Sofia and the warm Andalusian sun. My new home was a bright apartment with a balcony full of geraniums, overlooking a vibrant garden where residents practiced yoga in the morning. The air smelled of orange blossoms, not disinfectant. There was laughter in the hallways, live music in the courtyard, and a genuine respect for everyone's individuality. I exchanged imposed solitude for a chosen community. With the rest of the money, I did the most important thing of my life since becoming a mother. I created the Fundación El Nido Vacío, the Empty Nest Foundation. The name was a deliberate irony, a reframing of the pain. The foundation had a clear purpose: to sponsor cultural and artistic activities for the elderly in nursing homes, especially those with few resources. The mission was to bring music, art, poetry, and above all, dignity to those whom society and sometimes their own families had decided to forget. It was my way of transforming the cruelty I suffered into a source of beauty and connection for hundreds of others. I wasn't just the funder. I became the main volunteer. 3 times a week, I would visit different residences. One afternoon, I found myself in front of a small group, projecting images of Velázquez's Las Meninas onto a white wall. As I spoke about the composition, the light, the mystery in the eyes of the Infanta Margarita, I felt my own eyes sparkle with a passion I thought I had lost forever. I wasn't just talking about art. I was sharing my soul, offering a window to a world of beauty to people whose worlds had become small and gray. I was giving them back their sight. In those wrinkled, attentive faces, I saw myself, the woman I had been in room 2B. I saw the hunger for a conversation that wasn't about medication or illness. I saw the thirst to be seen as people, with stories, passions, and wisdom. After one lecture, a lady with trembling hands held mine and, with teary eyes, whispered, "Thank you. Today, you made me feel like I still exist." In that moment, I understood that my pain had not been in vain. It had become the bridge that connected me to them, the key that opened locked doors of loneliness and showed them there was still life to be lived. While my life filled with purpose, Hugo's emptied of its artificial shine. The news of what he had tried to do spread among family and his social circle. The shame, coupled with debts that could no longer be paid, forced him to sell everything: the luxury car, the expensive watch, the designer apartment where he and Beatriz threw parties. They moved to a modest rented apartment in the suburbs, a place with thin walls and none of the glamour they so valued. The silence between them was heavy, filled not with comfort, but with the mutual accusation of a shared failure. The consequence of his actions was a bankruptcy that went beyond money. He lost the respect of his colleagues, the admiration of his friends, and most importantly, he lost his mother. The wealth he had chased so desperately turned out to be a mirage, and in trying to grasp it, he fell into a desert of isolation. He and Beatriz were now trapped in a life they despised, forced to rebuild from scratch, haunted by the ghost of the luxurious life they had sacrificed everything for, only to find its foundation was rotten. He did not inherit my apartment, but he inherited the emptiness of his own choices. In Seville, I built a new family, a family not of blood, but of the soul. Sofia became the daughter I never had, visiting me for Sunday teas on my balcony. I made friends with other residents, artists, retired professors, people with fascinating stories. We shared dinners, went to concerts, laughed until our stomachs hurt. It was a life rich in affection, in mutual respect, and in genuine joy. I discovered that a home is not made of 4 walls, but of the people you choose to fill it with. My nest was no longer empty. It was full of a new kind of love. Looking back at the pain and humiliation, I no longer felt bitterness. Hugo had, unintentionally, given me the greatest gift of all. He forced me to save myself. He taught me that my dignity was non-negotiable and that my worth was not in my utility to others, but in my own essence. True wealth, I realized, is not in a bank account or a will. It is in the purpose we find, the beauty we create from our scars, and the love we cultivate. It is the only legacy that truly matters, and that no one can ever take from us. Now, every evening, I sit on my balcony with a glass of wine and watch the Seville sky paint itself in shades of orange and purple. I feel the warm breeze on my face and listen to the distant laughter of my new friends. I am at peace. I am no longer a footnote in someone else's story. I am the author of mine. And the final chapters, I have discovered, can be the most beautiful of all. My story did not end with a betrayal. It was reborn from it, stronger, brighter, and infinitely more valuable. Have you done a kind gesture that changed a life? Leave a little heart if you believe that love is more powerful than any wealth. Subscribe for more stories of second chances. Comment, "Love is priceless," if you also believe in human kindness.